Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. I am Scott. It is 5-year battle, Agatha Christie. We're down to the final 11. Every 5-year battle has been completed, so we have 11 books that are going to be facing off. Before we get to the quarterfinals starting next week, we have to get some books into those quarterfinals. So let's go ahead and get started. First, let me just remind you the books that have been selected for each 5-year period. The books are The Man in the Brown Suit, Mrs. McGinty's Dead, The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, Curtain, Ordeal by Innocence, Endless Night, And Then There Were None, The Mysterious Mr. Quinn, Death Comes as the End, Murder on the Orient Express, and Crooked House. This week, we will be having The Man in the Brown Suit face off against Mrs. McGinty's Dead, The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side face off against Curtain, and Ordeal by Innocence face off against Endless Night, so that we will complete the quarterfinals, the final 8, and then each week I will go each section of the quarterfinals with a little bit more in-depth information on the books than I had been providing these last 11 weeks or so. And then after those 4 weeks are complete, we will have the semifinals and then the finals in the same week. As I said when I did the Stephen King 5-year battles, you probably believe that you know what books are going to end up in the semifinals and finals. I will say they weren't the books that I expected in the Stephen King 5-year battle. Not all of them. Some of them were, yes, obvious. But there's always a chance. And I will let you know, much as with Insomnia in the Stephen King 5-year battle, that was my personal dark horse. That is one of my favorite Stephen King books. It is actually, when I did my ranking of Stephen King books, it ended up in number 2, and that was me ranking all 91 books. I have my own personal favorite here. I'm not saying it's gonna be number 1 because when I have the books face off against each other, I'm going to try to take all of the factors, including my personal feelings. So my personal feelings would probably be that the Mysterious Mr. Quinn would move up. But if it were to face off against And Then There Were None or Murder on the Orient Express, those two books have a lot of other factors that would make me have to, make a decision. I'm not necessarily doing just my favorite, and I'm also not doing the best. Both still a little subjective, but this week we're dealing with the 6 books to put them in the quarterfinals. We're going to start with The Man in the Brown Suit versus Mrs. McGinty's Dead. The Man in the Brown Suit is one of her first published books. I can't remember what order it is, but I believe it might have been book 2, but it was definitely in the first 5-year period. And it is one of those books which, if you've been through any of the 11 previous weeks, you know how I feel about spy books, political books, as far as Christie goes. Generally, they don't look favorably on them. I don't think she does them particularly well. I think the first 5-year period was relatively weak as far as competition goes. Mainly, I believe the most competition it had was The Mysterious Affair at Styles, with the biggest selling point. One, it's her first book. It's also her first Perot book. But I just didn't feel like the mystery itself was particularly compelling. And you will have also noticed, if you've watched before, I'm not a Hastings fan, and Hastings, although this is not his worst novel, I believe his worst novel is Murder on the Links. He downgraded a little bit. So The Man in the Brown Suit won this. There are problems with this book. It has the typical Christie point of view on relationships, on the male female dynamic, which, to be perfectly honest, was accepted as somewhat the norm at the time, but it does come across as a little cavemanish. But again, the relationship isn't the big selling point of the novel, so it's just one of those things that you go along with. There's also part of the novel takes place in Africa. Um, Christie is not known for her sensitivity. I don't think that this book is as bad as some other books go, and her racism has never been as bad as her anti-Semitism. So there's that going against the Man in the Brown Suit. But it's a very interesting story throughout. I have to stop using the word interesting so much. I like the story. I generally like the characters, and I like the setup. It one of the few of her spy novels that kind of had me on the edge of my seat for a while. Then we have on the other side one of only 3 pro books in these final 11, which is a little bit surprising to me. I expected at least half of the books to be pro books, and 3 out of 11 still pretty good, but I expected more. Pro is what I knew Christie for. Honestly, when I first read Christie books, way back when I was a teenager, I pretty much all I read was Pro, and then there were none. I don't think I read anything else from her. I definitely didn't read Miss Marple or Tommy and Tuppence. So Pro is what I knew Christie for. I'll be quite honest, Mrs. McGinty's Dead isn't the best Pro novel. It's probably not in the top 5, but there are just other books that got eliminated because they were in such strong 5-year periods. I believe like 1931 through 1935 had 13 books in of them, and I think at least 8 of them, if not more, were pro books. So some really good pro books got eliminated by the methodology that I'm using. Mrs. McGinty's Dead is not the best. It's still a good pro book, especially considering it's a late pro book, and it's pro doing a village mystery, something that Miss Marple is usually known for. It's got more humor in it than most pro books. I don't think that the crime is particularly groundbreaking or surprising, but it's fun. It's a fun read. We have 2 books that I don't really expect to have been here. A spy novel, essentially, and a late pro. And it's very difficult for me to make the pick. I have 2 more battles that I need to do. I think those are easier. I know what's number one in one of them. I don't actually know what's number one in the other one, but I still think it's probably easier than this one. I This is going to almost be a flip the coin kind of thing, or more just my brain is just going to go. I'm going to say that The Man in the Brown Suit is the better of these 2 books. That means that next week, the Man in the Brown Suit will be facing off against and then there were none. Who knows what's gonna be picked out of that battle? But that is the battle set for next week. The second set of books is The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, which is a Miss Marple book, versus Curtain, which is the last Hercule Poirot book. It's the last published Hercule Poirot book. It was actually published in the. It was actually written in the 40s. She wrote it to be his last book. It's also the return of Hastings after being gone for about 30 years or so. He disappeared, I believe in 1937 was his last book that he was in. He continued to be in short stories, but as far as novels, that was his last one. And then he comes back in 1975. So it's actually like 38 years. So close to 40 years between novel appearances by Hastings. Curtain being here is the result of a few things. One, it was in the final period of Christie. It wasn't a 5 year period because she published books from 71 to 76, and I wasn't going to do 76 by itself. And then there was a book published in 1997 that was a collection of short stories. So I did all those in this 5 year period. But it was near the end of her life. There's a possibility that she had been suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, and that may have impacted her writing. I don't know if it's true. But it feels true at least when you read the books. Again, Curtain was written in the 40s, though. So you have going off again, going up against not particularly strong competition, and it's Pro's last book. In it's Pro's final case, and I try not to spoil anything in these 5 year battles. Sometimes I do, and I apologize if I do. But I will just say, look at the title of the book. That tells you something. The problem with is that it's not a particularly great pro book. Hastings is annoying, like very annoying. His stupidity is a plot point. It's Hastings' stupidity has never been interesting to me at all. Uh, Perot's cases with Ariadne Oliver, at least his interactions with her, were more interesting to me than Hastings. Hastings is one of my least favorite characters in Christie. The murderer, who it turns out to be, is built up to be like essentially Perot's greatest foe, and that person is not. I don't feel that there's any reason that the novel had to end the way that it did, other than it's Perot's last novel. Dude, I'm talking here. So we have that, and then we have The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, a Miss Marple book about a woman is killed at an event where a famous actress is at. She is given the actress's drink and is poisoned. And of course, Miss Marple is involved in it. And it's not my favorite Miss Marple book. My favorite Miss Marple book is not in here because it suffered the same consequence as a lot of pro books, is that it was in a period where there were just so many good books. And that was The Murder at the Vicarage. But this is still a very good book. I like the mystery. I like the characters. I think it's clever enough, not as clever as some of her best work, but it's still fairly clever, probably as clever as she gets in the Miss Marple books. So I don't know. This may be a shock for some, but yeah, it's going to be the mirror crack from side to side, and we are down to there only being one pro book in the final eight. But that's just the way it works somehow. So then we have two non-series books. No Perot, no Miss Marple, no Tommy and Tuppence. There are no Tommy and Tuppence here. Sorry about that. I will say, since I won't have the chance to say it again, Tommy and Tuppence, great characters, never got the great material to go with their characters. I've said that many times. They should have been in more books. They should have replaced Hastings with Tommy and Tuppence. Um, so we have Ordeal by Innocence, which is a murder mystery, a murder that happened in the past. A man comes to a family and says he is the alibi for the son who had been convicted of murder of his mother, but he had suffered a concussion and had left the country, so he did not know that he would be the son's alibi. So he comes back, tells them this. They know that there's a murder still at large, and it's basically a battle of people trying to find the murderer and the murderer trying to make sure that he or she isn't caught. I do like the novel. As I stated when I did this 5 year period, there is a pretty big issue for me with how Christie looks at adoptees, because the woman that is murdered, all of her children are adopted. Christie, not just in this book and other books, has seemed to push the theory that adopted children basically aren't the same as biological children. They're not really your children. And she highlight, hello, okay, that one was quick. Could you, yeah, okay. Uh, she highlights that by having two of the children who were both adopted when they were children, like toddler age. Oh, okay, I'm going to push you down because you're being annoying. Thank you. She has the two of them basically starting a relationship with each other. I wouldn't say that that's a huge part of the novel, but it's kind of like always in my head in the book, so I'm kind of like, ick. But other than that, great book. I love the main character. And then we have Endless Night. Endless Night is somewhat of a mystery, a little bit more of a thriller, kind of has a bit of supernatural tinge on it. It's not supernatural, but it has kind of a gothic feel to it. Uh, but a man meets a woman. She is rich, although she tries to pretend that she's just a normal girl. And they get married, and they face obstacles in their relationship, and there are strange things happening, and there is murder. And that's basically all I will say about that. Uh, it is, I believe it was published in the late 60s. I think it was 68, but I could be off a little bit on that. For a book published like in the last 15 years of her life, it's just an amazingly good book. And I have said previously in videos, there's a difference between unlikable characters and characters that you can't empathize with, you can't connect with. There are many unlikable characters in this book, but I can connect with them. I understand them. Hi again, Wash. Hey, buddy. Uh, Wash is telling me I need to end the video soon, I guess. It this one is the one that I knew what the book was before I even started this. The other two, I wasn't sure what book I was gonna pick. But yeah, it's gonna be Endless Night for this one. So next week, and not next week, but in 4 weeks, Endless Night will be going up against Crooked House, another standalone novel. The Mirror Crack from Side to Side will be in 3 weeks going up against Murder on the Orient Express. So we have quite a final eight. One Marple, one Perot, one Harley Quinn, and then the rest are basically standalone novels. And again, not what I was expecting. I was expecting a lot of Perot. And honestly, if I had done this as just the 8 best books, there probably would have been more Perot in it, but that's not the way I'm doing it. All I will tell you is at the end of this, the best book is the best book. So, that is it for this week. Keep hitting puberty. That is it for this week. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell Wash he's a cute boy. And I will talk to you next time.